Hey community, welcome to Behind the Message. I'm Sareen Musselman. I'm sitting down with our teaching pastor, Tammy Melchien, who just gave the talk for week 2 of our series called Jesus Is. And I'm so excited to talk with you about this message.
Me too.
I just have to start though by asking, do we have to unpack like our first impressions of each other right now?
First impressions? I don't know.
It could get a little awkward.
Did what I share in the talk meet yours?
Yeah, you're very intimidating. I was very nervous to sit down with you today, Tammy.
She's not.
No, I'm not.
She's not. No.
It is funny though, because I think you and I have empathized a little with each other because we share some similar life experiences, even because we're both tall women. So there's like some shared things there.
Yes, I always find it funny too in terms of impressions because people that have seen me on Community Online, if I show up in person, every time, no exceptions, I hear, "You're much taller in person than you look on TV." So I don't know, somehow in this I look short, maybe you do too, but we're actually both fairly tall.
Yeah, you mean you don't like fit onto a screen this big in real life?
I guess not.
Funny how that works. In the message though, you actually talked about empathy. We talked about a scripture from Hebrews that tells us that we don't have a high priest who is unable to empathize with us. I think that's really powerful actually when I think about God in the flesh being able to relate to us when we feel overwhelmed or tempted or angry, or these things that we experience in our lives that Jesus can empathize with us. How does that affect our faith? Like how we can relate to God, maybe for you personally, when you think about it in that way?
Yeah, well, I think that's why the writer of Hebrews is addressing it, because like we talked about at the beginning of the message, so many times we form these first impressions, we thin slice, and I think most of us carry a first impression of God that he is so other that like he can't relate. Yeah. And there is an aspect of God that he is other, he is holy, there is no one like him, but in Jesus, he decided to come near and empathize with us. Yeah. And so I think sometimes though we still have this roadblock where we think, okay, Jesus came, he was born into this world, but he was really more like Superman. Yeah. Like he wasn't really one of us. But no, the writer of Hebrews is saying, no, he really was one of us. He took on human flesh. He took on human experience. He took on human emotions. He took on human challenges. And so when the writer of Hebrews is telling us we don't have a high priest who's not able to sympathize with us, he's saying everything you go through, Jesus went through and he understands.
It's so powerful.
Yeah, and so it's, I think that's one of the reasons we're doing this whole series is to help us, maybe look at the ways that we have thin sliced, look at the impressions that we have at God that maybe don't line up with who he really is. And how do we reorient our understanding around, who Jesus says he is. Yeah.
You also shared some really life-giving words that tell us who Jesus says who we are. And I think about that through what you just said. We can sort of thin slice our impression of who God is, and the ripple effect of that then as people who are created in God's image is then that also sets us up to thin slice our own impression of who we are in Christ. Sure. And so you shared like these words of life, and that instead of being condemned, that we're forgiven, we're accepted, we're loved. And I just wonder, what does that look like for our faith and even how we interact with other people? We see others as image bearers and we see them through the lens of those words that you spoke. If we actually take those words to be true in our own lives. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think really so much of a spiritual journey, so much of what it means to grow as a Christ follower, I think can be summed up in coming to understand more and more who God is, and in light of that to understand more and more of who I am, who we are. Because I sometimes feel like what spiritual maturity really is coming to really understand at the deepest level and I'm not just talking about intellectual understanding, I'm talking about in your whole being understand that you really are loved by God. that God is love,
Yeah.
and that my identity really is the beloved. And, we can say that, but I really think it takes a whole lifetime of a journey
Yeah.
to really live that. And that's why, like, when we're confronted with the story, like we read, like we looked at in this message, we can read that story and we're so thankful for how Jesus treated that woman, but then yet we put ourselves in her shoes and we're like, but with me it would be different. Because we don't understand like how loved we truly are.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it's like, God, help me understand that. Help me understand my belovedness. And because when you understand your belovedness, some people think like, oh, well then, like if you understand, like, cause you're always forgiven, then, like you can go out and do whatever you want and it's not going to matter. But if you really understand how loved you are and what it means that you're the beloved, I think the exact opposite happens. You're like, it's not a license to just kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's more like, oh my gosh, I have never been loved this way. And how can I love back?
Yes, exactly.
And it's not that love back does not come from a place of duty or guilt or trying to earn love.
Yeah.
It's like when you're loved and you grasp how you're loved, like you want to reciprocate that.
Absolutely.
And so I just feel like so much of our journey is, coming to grasp that. And I wonder with that woman, like what, gosh, don't you wish we had like the next chapter in her life?
Yeah. What life looked like for her next after that? Totally.
Yeah. I mean, she had to just be stunned at what happened to her. And like, I wonder, did she walk away from that? Like, did she begin to grasp how loved she really was, despite kind of where she found herself at that moment?
That's so true. It's that you talked about moving from just a knowledge. So it's like moving from that head to heart and the transformation that can happen when that takes place. And it does transform like every area of our life. So you were starting to hit on this actually of like, it becomes more natural. I feel like instead of it being a task or something to do, it sort of flows out of this place of being grounded in who I am and in my identity as being beloved. I start to view other people differently. And you talked about Jesus's posture in your message of that rather than pointing a finger, Jesus is actually looking at us with open arms. And so how does that look for me maybe this coming week or for someone watching to look to Jesus's example of having a posture of open arms in my relationship with someone in my life or a relationship with someone in your life where it's easier to do this. What's maybe a practical way for us to take a step towards having open arms?
And that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
That's where it's challenging. But I think it's also why Jesus said, people will know you're my disciples by the way you love each other. And so that is for us to learn to model the love of Jesus, which is not a this love, it's a this love.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like for us to really experience and really like experience God's love in that way, we need it from each other.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in a conversation last week with someone who, they started saying some things that, like you feel it, like you're,
Yes.
you kind of feel it rising in you and that like, that's not right. I'm getting frustrated. I'm getting, and it's almost like in that moment I had to catch myself and go, okay, the way this person is looking at things, the thing that they're saying is not right, but I have a choice in this moment. Like, and if I take this kind of frame, it's probably not going to be very helpful.
Yeah.
But how do I, take this frame and love them to a better place?
Yes.
And, oh man, like, I don't feel like my batting average at that is always so great.
Yeah.
But some of that is in, in that moment of like, we have a choice in those moments. And to think back to Jesus, he had a choice in that moment when that woman was standing before him. And the choice he made was shocking.
Yes.
But as his followers, I think that's the choice that we're called to too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the grace and the forgiveness comes in, that when we don't get it right 100% of the time, we can keep practicing it and keep taking steps.
And give grace to each other.
Absolutely.
In that,
yeah, that's so good. Well, community, we would love to help you take next steps in living this life together of finding our way back to God and modeling Jesus's example in our own lives. So go over to communitychristian.info. We have so many resources on there to help you take a next step. And if you missed this week's message, be sure to go back over there and watch it as well. There's some great stuff there. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Tammy. We'll see you next time.
My first impression is that you're so well-spoken, professional, great eye contact,
Very calm.
Very calm, cool and collected, yeah.
That's very sweet.
You look like you've got it all together.
Oh, jeez. That's a lot of pressure.
If we actually live out our Enneagram in this setting, you could get really direct with me and I could just get lost in my thoughts and not respond.
This could be great. Tammy will just stare.
Enneagram 8 and an Enneagram 5.